Moneyweb at midday for all your up-to-date stories.
Now, South Africans are showing growing interest in electric vehicles, but interest, I think, doesn't always translate into sales. Now, you would have read about ABSA and the Chinese electric vehicle giant BYD officially launching BYD Finance. It's, as I understand it, a dedicated finance ecosystem aimed at making new energy vehicles more accessible in South Africa. But and here's the rub, research still identifying high prices, limited affordable models and electricity constraints as major barriers. So it begs the question, can innovative finance genuinely move EVs from niche to mainstream? So let's have a conversation now with Alan Quinn, who is Chief Product and Innovation Officer at cars.co.za. It's a South African online automotive marketplace and motoring information platform. Alan, welcome to you and thanks for talking to us. So is finance really the big obstacle, or are electric vehicles just too expensive beyond the reach of the ordinary South African?
Short answer, yes. Finance is an obstacle. But look, finance is a part of a car buying equation for the vast majority of people. Maybe, Jeremy, you know people who buy cars cash. I know very few of them. None of us know very few of them. Finance is part of buying cars. But really, if you look at EV's history over the last few years, go back 2-3 years, you couldn't find an EV for less than R1 million. They just didn't exist because mainly the legacy manufacturers were playing in that space. And these were beautiful cars. They were fast cars, but they were just way too expensive for this market. The Chinese at that time, and I'll talk about the Chinese a bit more later, were really focusing on establishing a foothold in your mid-range SUV and especially petrol vehicles there, which they have done. Now, if you look at EV technology, Tesla might be the poster child, but the best EV technology actually comes out of China because they produce it for their own market for their own reasons. And so now that has become a focus over the last 12 months, bringing in lower price EVs. And the real game changer came from BYD with a BYD Dolphin Surf and now Geely and the Geely E2. That has come in at a very different price point. You're talking at just above 300K. And that makes it a very different equation for most car buyers because the market of car buyers at the 300 to 500K mark is vastly more than it is at over R1 million.
Is there, Alan, genuine demand at this point in South Africa? Now, I know that cars.co.za is seeing more EV searches, but the real test is how many of those become actual purchases.
Short answer is yes. There is a lot more demand about searches, but a lot more demand about NEVs in total. Because if you look at EVs as part of an NEV, new energy vehicle question, plug-in hybrids and so on, there's just the introduction of the technology. It feels very new to us. It's not new if you're in Europe and another market, but it feels very new to us. And that's because OEMs are waking up to this technology and are pushing it and putting it in our face a lot more often, which is increasing the interest. When it comes to buying, if you asked me 3-4 months ago, I would have said no. I'd have been reasonably cynical about that. But then Donald Trump started the greatest geography lesson in history. Who of us knew where the Strait of Hormuz was a few months ago? And that has fundamentally changed our market. And I think this is a seminal moment because the price of petrol, and not just the price of petrol, but we now regard petrol the same way we regarded electricity a few years ago. It's volatile, isn't it? It's expensive. We now dislike it. And that has really changed it. And if you look at the running costs of EVs, they are strikingly better. And that, all those factors coming together in 2026, I think is what's driving more interest, which is driving demand. The Dolphin Surf, there was 1 month there, the Dolphin Surf outsold the Kia Picanto as a new car. Now, you would never have predicted that a year ago, and it happened. We've Donald Trump to thank for all of that.
There is, of course, risk, though. Two things spring to mind. One is the charging network. Is it ready for wider adoption beyond urban motorists? And secondly, dealers themselves, would they be equipped well enough to service, repair, and value these vehicles?
Charging network, right. So, quite frankly, no. I stand here in my house near Santon. I don't know when my nearest EV charger is, and most people don't. So to try and sell it based on charging networks, and unfortunately most of the market has tried to sell it about range anxiety and charging networks. I just don't think that's a viable sale in 2026 and won't be for a couple of years. But I think there's other niches, and that's where we're seeing the growth coming. There is plenty of people who are two-car families. I might want one car to drive to Dulstrom at the weekend, but I don't need two cars to drive to Dulstrom. And if the operating cost of my second car, the daily, or whatever you want to call it, the commute, the kid's car, if the operating cost of that, then that's a viable conversation. And so I have a friend who lives at Midstream Estate up in Midrand. He's saying he's seeing a lot of dolphin surfs sitting about. Why? Because people are using them for their dailies. And so that is a niche and not a small niche. The second I would say is if you're a CFO and someone brought you a proposition to buy EVs into your fleet a year ago, you would have shrugged and moved on to the next subject. Now, because of the petrol price, because of the operating cost, because of model availability and manufacturers buying it, you will listen to that. And those cars, and remember, a lot of fleet vehicles like commercial vehicles, but there's also a lot of cars out there that act as fleet vehicles as well. Those cars have defined radiuses. They come back to home base every night. They have tracking software that manages their drivers, no less, and making sure they're not doing. And for all of those, now suddenly, I think in these niches, you will start to grow a demand, and those niches will gradually expand into the future.
So let me U-turn back to this BYD ABSA tie-up. In actual rands and cents then, Alan, what does this partnership change for a buyer?
Look, banks work with OEMs all the time. There's a word they call subvention. That's not subversion. That's a very different word. Subvention is banks working with them to put basically deals together because everyone likes to feel special. Everyone likes to feel their special deal. There is no such thing as prime minus 1%. That is a subvention mechanism where they're both working together to make sure that the finance is cheaper. So all of that has happened, and BYD will work with ABSA very closely. They're both quality organizations, and they'll do that. What I think is interesting about that is they're talking a lot about what's called GFV, or Guaranteed Future Value, which is a terribly marketed concept in the industry, because what on earth does GFV mean? It's basically like a rental contract instead of a finance contract. In a rental contract, you don't worry about what the vehicle is worth in the future. And in GFE, you don't worry about what is vehicle in the future. The one difference between a rental contract is with GFE, you have to buy your own insurance, you have to pay for your own tires, and you also have to fill in the little container, the windscreen washers. That's the only difference. Other than that, you take the keys, you drive around a few years, you give them back, like a rental contract. Now, what that takes away is anxiety over what this car is going to be worth in 3 years' time. And for EVs, that's a real anxiety, because the supply and demand mechanisms that dictate price in 3 years' time are just too rudimentary, too unknown. And so that market needs to grow. There needs to be data that informs that market so that people know how to buy and sell and trade these vehicles in 3 years' time, because the market's so small that doesn't exist. But GFE takes that away, and that's a very promising development.
Alan Quinn, thank you very much indeed. Chief Product and Innovation Officer at cars.co.za.